My parents told me I didn't deserve a share of the inheritance because I didn't need it. I didn't argue. But what happened next changed how they saw me forever. I still remember exactly where I was standing when my mother said it. I was in my kitchen in Vancouver. It was a Tuesday evening, sometime in late October, one of those gray drizzly nights where the city looks like it's wrapped in gauze. I had just gotten home from a 12-hour shift. My scrubs were still on. I hadn't even taken my shoes off yet. I was standing by the counter with the phone pressed to my ear, a glass of water in my other hand, half listening because honestly, my parents' calls had started to follow a certain pattern by then, and I thought I already knew what this one was going to be. I was wrong. "We've made a decision about the house," my mother said. Her voice had that particular flatness it gets when she's already decided something and is telling you about it, not asking you. "We're leaving it to Marcus and Delia." I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there, water glass still in my hand, kitchen light buzzing faintly overhead. "Okay," I said finally. "Can I ask why?" And then she said it, calm as anything, like it was the most reasonable sentence in the world. "Cassidy, you don't need it. You're doing well for yourself. Marcus has the kids and Delia's always struggled. You have a good job. You'll be fine. My name is Cassidy Marlowe. I'm 34 years old." And that sentence, "you don't need it," is one I'd been hearing in various forms my entire life. I just didn't know until that Tuesday night that it would be the one that finally made me stop explaining myself. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I said, "All right, Mom. I appreciate you letting me know." We hung up. I put the glass down. I stood there for a long moment looking at the rain on the window. And then I started making some calls of my own. Before I get into what happened next, I need to back up. Because none of this makes sense without understanding my family, and my family doesn't make sense without understanding that it took me about 30 years to finally see it clearly. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Ontario. My parents, Gerald and Patricia Marlowe, were the kind of people who presented very well. Nice house in a decent neighborhood. My dad worked in insurance, my mom did bookkeeping part-time. They went to church. They had friends over for dinner. If you met them at a block party you would think, nice couple, solid family. There were 3 of us kids. Marcus is the oldest, he's 40 now. Then me. Then Delia, who's 31. Marcus was always my dad's favorite. I don't say that bitterly, it was just true. The way some things in a family are just true and everyone knows it and nobody says it out loud. Marcus had this big personality, played hockey, was loud and funny and took up space in a way my dad admired. They'd watch games together. My dad coached his team for a season. Marcus could do no wrong, and when he did do something wrong, there was always a reason for it that got explained away. Delia was my mother's favorite. Delia is, I don't know how to say this kindly, so I'll just say it, Delia has always been someone who needs a lot of rescuing. She dropped out of 2 colleges. She had a series of relationships that all ended badly and loudly. She's made financial decisions that would make an accountant physically ill. And every single time, my mother was there. Lending money. Making calls. Smoothing things over. My mother's love for Delia was real, I don't doubt that, but it had a flavor to it that was almost like a project. Like Delia was always the one who needed saving, and my mother needed to be the one saving her. And then there was me. I was the one who got good grades without being asked, who didn't cause scenes, who left for university on a scholarship and didn't come back asking for anything. I put myself through nursing school, worked brutal shifts, moved to Vancouver for a hospital position that was a genuine opportunity, built a life that was, I don't know, stable, real, mine, and somehow, somewhere along the way, doing well had become a reason to receive less. I don't think my parents consciously decided to sideline me. I want to be fair to them. I've spent a lot of time trying to be fair to them. I think what happened is more subtle and more depressing than malice. I think I was just the one who seemed fine, and they had limited energy, and they directed it where they thought it was most needed. The problem is that seeming fine is not the same as not needing anything. And being capable is not the same as being okay with being overlooked. I just never said that. Not once. In 34 years. until I didn't have to say it at all. Let me give you some context on what this house actually meant. My grandparents on my dad's side, Grandma Ruth and Grandpa Bill, had a property out in Prince Edward County. It wasn't massive or fancy. A 4-bedroom house on about 2 acres. But it had been in the family for a long time, and it mattered in the way that places matter when they hold people's memories. We spent summers there when I was a kid. I knew every corner of that house. The way the screen door to the back porch squeaked. The particular smell of the linen closet. The big maple in the backyard that I used to climb until I was about 13 and suddenly became self-conscious about it. When Grandma Ruth passed, about 6 years ago, she left the property to my parents, specifically to my father, as the only surviving child. It was worth something. Not a fortune, but meaningful. And the understanding, always unspoken, was that eventually it would come down to the 3 of us. It wasn't just about money. I want to be clear about that. I'm not sitting here calculating square footage. It was about what it meant that I was part of this family, that my place in it was equal, that being self-sufficient didn't mean being expendable. And then came that October phone call where my mother calmly told me I was being cut out of it, and the reason given was that I didn't need it. Not, we talked to all 3 of you. Not, we wanted to hear your thoughts. Not even, we're sorry, this was a hard decision. Just, you don't need it. You'll be fine. I've replayed that call a lot. What strikes me now is not the anger I felt, and I did feel it, like a slow burn in my chest, but the exhaustion. This bone-deep exhaustion, like something I'd been carrying for years, had just gotten too heavy to pretend it wasn't there. Here's the thing nobody tells you about being the capable one in a family. There's an invisible tax on it. Every time you handle something yourself, it gets noted, not as an achievement, but as evidence that you can be assigned less. Every time you don't ask for help, the expectation hardens that you don't need any. Every time you show up steady, it's taken as confirmation that you'll keep showing up steady no matter how little you're given. I had been paying that tax for 34 years. And I was done. Now, here's where I have to tell you about something I'd been sitting on for about 8 months before that phone call. Something that I hadn't told my family. Not because I was planning anything dramatic, I genuinely wasn't. It just hadn't come up, and I hadn't volunteered it, and looking back, I think some part of me already understood why. About a year before my mother called, I had been contacted by a woman named Deborah Finch. Deborah was a patient's advocate at the hospital where I worked, and through a completely separate set of circumstances I won't bore you with, we ended up having a long conversation about estate planning and family dynamics that kind of cracked my brain open a little. She wasn't a lawyer, but she told me to talk to one, specifically about what she called documented contribution records. Basically, a paper trail of financial, emotional, or logistical contributions made to a family or family property over time. I went home and I thought about that. And then I did something I'd never done before. I started writing things down. Every time I'd paid for something for a family gathering and not been reimbursed. The years I'd been sending my parents money, not a huge amount, but consistent, to help with bills after my dad's hours got cut. The time I flew home and spent an entire week sorting out my grandmother's medical paperwork because neither Marcus nor Delia could be bothered. The money I'd spent on flights home for family events, the gifts, the time off work, the coverage of Delia's birthday dinner one year when she forgot her wallet and then forgot to pay me back. None of these things were huge individually. Together, across a decade plus, they added up to something real. Not just financially, logistically, emotionally. I had been contributing to this family for a long time. Quietly, consistently, and without anyone seeming to notice. I kept writing things down. I kept receipts and emails where I had them. I noted dates and amounts. I wasn't even sure what I was going to do with it. I think I was just finally tired of letting it be invisible. So when my mother made that phone call in October, I wasn't starting from zero. I already had a folder. About 3 weeks after the phone call, my parents announced a family Thanksgiving gathering. They wanted everyone home, Marcus and his wife Jolene and their 2 kids, Delia and me. The Prince Edward County property was specifically mentioned. "Let's all be at the house together," my mother said in the group text. "It'll be good for everyone." I almost didn't go. I sat with my phone for a while, reading that text, thinking about all the reasons not to. But here's why I went. I needed to look at this situation up close before I made any decisions. I'd spent the past few weeks talking to a lawyer, a woman named Priya Anand, who a colleague had recommended, specializing in estate and family property law. Priya had been very helpful and very calm and had told me several things that were useful to know. But she'd also said that before doing anything, I should understand the full picture of what I was dealing with. So I booked a flight. I packed a bag. I put on my most neutral face. And I went home for Thanksgiving. Marcus and Jolene arrived in a new SUV. That was the first thing I noticed. It was a nice one, the kind with the fancy console and the heated seats and the third row. Marcus has always had an instinct for making his financial situation look slightly better than it is. He's in sales, has been for years, and he makes decent money, but he spends like he makes more than he does. Their house in Mississauga has a mortgage that, based on what Marcus has mentioned over the years, is fairly aggressive. The kids, Nate, who's 9, and Sophie, who's 6, came barreling out of the SUV, and my mother lit up in a way I haven't seen her look at any of us adults in a long time. I don't begrudge the kids that. They're genuinely lovely children. It wasn't their fault. Delia showed up late, as Delia always does. She'd driven up with her current boyfriend, a guy named Troy, who I was meeting for the first time, and who had the particular energy of someone who was very confident about things he didn't know much about. Delia looked tired in a way she's been looking for a few years now. Older than she is. She hugged me and said, "Cass, I love your hair," and meant it, and I hugged her back and meant that too, because whatever else is complicated between us, I do love my sister. I just stopped pretending our relationship is equal. The house itself looked the same. Slightly more worn than I remembered. The porch railing had been painted over, badly, and the maple in the backyard had lost a big branch at some point, and the scar was still visible. But it smelled the same. That particular combination of old wood and my grandmother's curtains, which my mother had kept. Dinner was fine. My mother made turkey, which she's done every year since I can remember. My dad carved it with that same focused expression he always has. The kids talked about school. Marcus told a long story about a deal he'd closed that I'm fairly sure was exaggerated. Troy offered opinions on cryptocurrency at one point, and I watched my father's eye twitch slightly, which honestly was the most fun I'd had in months. I was very quiet. I think maybe more quiet than usual. At one point my mother looked at me across the table and said, "You're being thoughtful tonight, Cassidy," and I smiled and said, "Just tired from the flight." After dinner, when the kids were watching something on a tablet and Delia and Troy had gone to smoke on the porch and Jolene was helping clean up, I ended up alone in the sitting room with my father. Gerald Marlowe is, look, he's complicated to me. I've spent a lot of my life wanting him to see me, and I've spent the last few years making peace with the fact that he sees what he expects to see, and he's not always interested in looking harder. But he's not a cruel man. He's just a man with blind spots the size of provinces. He sat down in his armchair with his coffee and said, "So, things are good in Vancouver." "Things are good," I said. "Good." He nodded. "You always land on your feet, Cass. Always have." He meant it as a compliment. I know he did. And I just smiled. "Yeah," I said. "I always do." The moment things shifted, not explosively, not dramatically, just shifted, came on Saturday afternoon. My parents gathered the three of us. Me, Marcus, Delia, in the sitting room while Jolene took the kids for a walk and Troy mercifully had gone to find Wi-Fi somewhere. My parents sat together on the love seat. They had a folder on the coffee table. I had been expecting this. Priya had told me this kind of gathering often happened, the parents presenting the estate decision as fait accompli, bringing everyone together to make it feel collaborative when actually it was already decided. My mother started. "We wanted to be all together when we talked about this, because we think it's important to be a family about it." She put her hand on the folder. "You all know we've been thinking about what happens with the house. And we've made our decision." Marcus, I noticed, didn't look surprised. Delia was looking at her hands. My mother explained it in the same measured tone she'd used on the phone. The house would be left jointly to Marcus and Delia. Marcus, because he had a family and the house could benefit the children, and Delia, because she paused here in a way that was probably meant to be delicate. Delia is still building stability, and this will give her something solid. Then she looked at me. Cassidy, we know this seems like a lot to take in, but you've built such a strong life. You have your career, your apartment, your savings. You don't need this the way they do. She actually repeated the phrase. You don't need this. Marcus nodded slowly. That particular nod I'd seen him do my whole life, the one that means he agrees with what's being said and feels slightly uncomfortable that he agrees, but isn't going to say anything about it. Delia finally looked up. For a second, just a second, I thought I saw something cross her face. Something that wasn't entirely comfortable. But then it was gone. Everyone looked at me. And here's what I did. I nodded. I said, "Thank you for telling me in person." I asked one or two calm, specific questions about the timeline of the decision and whether there was a will being formally drafted. My mother answered them. My father added a few things. I wrote nothing down, but I remembered everything. And then I said, "Can I just have a few minutes? I'm going to take a walk." I walked outside, down to the backyard, stood under the maple tree with the scarred branch. The October air was cold and smelled like wood smoke from somewhere down the road. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, not doing anything in particular. Just letting the cold settle around me. Letting myself feel the thing I was feeling, which was a kind of grief I hadn't expected, not just for the house, but for the version of my family I'd spent 34 years hoping existed. Then I went back inside, helped with dishes, played a board game with the kids, went to bed. And the next morning, I drove to the train station and went back to my life. And I made a phone call to Priya Anand. I want to be careful here about how I frame this, because I'm not interested in making this sound like some elaborate revenge plot. It wasn't. I'm not built for revenge, I find it exhausting. What I wanted was to be seen. And since asking directly had never worked, I was going to let the facts do it. Priya listened to everything. The phone call, the Thanksgiving meeting, the history, the folder I'd been building. She asked good questions. Precise, not emotional. She has this quality where she doesn't editorialize. She just gathers information, and then she tells you what the law says, and then she lets you decide. What she told me was this. The property, left to my father by my grandmother, was his to leave however he chose. There was no legal obligation to divide it equally. That was simply the reality, and I needed to know it up front. There was no magic legal argument I could make that would force my parents to include me. But there were a few things worth knowing. First, over the years, I had made documented financial contributions to the upkeep of the family home. Specifically, when the furnace broke 4 years ago and my parents couldn't cover the repair, I had paid for it. Not as a loan, my mother had said at the time, "We'll work it out later," which is the sentence that means a loan is actually a gift. But I had the emails, the bank transfer, the receipt. There were a few other smaller things like this. Not a huge amount, but real. Second, there was the matter of the estate paperwork for my grandmother, the work I had done, flying home, organizing the documents, coordinating with the law office. Priya said that while this was harder to quantify, it was worth noting because it established a pattern of contribution that contradicted the family's apparent picture of me as someone who was simply doing well and uninvolved. Third, and this was the one that mattered most. My father had never actually updated his will. The house was still listed, in the existing will, as going to all 3 children equally. This was an old will, made when we were teenagers, and obviously not his final intention. But it was the current legal document. He hadn't changed it yet. Now, I want to be absolutely clear, I was not going to swoop in and claim a legal windfall my parents didn't intend for me. That's not who I am. That's not what this was about. What I decided to do was write a letter. I spent 2 weeks writing it, rewrote it many times. Priya reviewed a version of it. She said it was clear and fair and factually grounded. It wasn't an angry letter. It wasn't a threatening letter. It was just honest. Maybe the first completely honest document I'd ever sent to my family. I told them I understood their reasoning. I told them I respected that it was their decision. And then I told them, calmly and specifically, what the last decade had actually looked like from my side. The furnace. The flights home for events they said they needed me at. The money I'd sent when things were tight. The week I took off work for my grandmother's paperwork. The birthday dinner. The bridesmaid weekend for Marcus's wedding that I paid a significant chunk of. The years of being told you're fine and understanding that to mean we don't need to invest in you. I wasn't demanding anything. I was just asking them to see it. And then I said this, near the end. I love this family. I've shown that love consistently, in practical ways, for a long time. I don't need the house in the way that word is probably meant. I'm not going to lose my home without it. But I need to know that I'm seen as a member of this family who has contributed to it, not just a success story to be pointed to when it's convenient. I'm not sure I can continue to show up the way I have been without that acknowledgement. I think we all need to think about what family actually means for us going forward. I sent it to both my parents. Email with a read receipt. And then I waited. They didn't respond for 11 days. 11 days. Which, if you have the kind of parents mine are, you understand is actually a significant data point. My mother typically replies to messages within hours. She's a communicator, sometimes too much of one. 11 days of silence from her meant something was happening. I filled those 11 days with work, which I'm good at. I'm an ICU nurse, have been for 6 years. The kind of job that has a way of reorganizing your internal proportions. When you spend your days with people in the hardest moments of their lives, it clarifies things. You learn pretty quickly what matters and what is noise. I also, during those 11 days, had a conversation with my friend Margot, who has known me since nursing school and knows my family history probably better than any therapist I've ever seen. Margot is blunt in the way that people who really love you are blunt. She doesn't dress things up, but she also doesn't enjoy being harsh. She's just precise. "What do you want to happen?" she asked me. We were walking along the seawall, coffee cups in hand, that particular Vancouver gray all around us. I thought about it. I want them to actually think about it. Not just make a decision and present it. And if they don't? I didn't answer right away. I'd been thinking about this a lot. Then I think I have to change what I give to this relationship, I said finally. Not in a dramatic way. Not cutting anyone off. Just, I've been operating like my consistency will eventually be recognized, and I think I need to let go of that expectation. I can love my family without organizing my life around hoping they'll notice. Margot nodded. Sipped her coffee. That sounds healthy. It also sounds incredibly hard. Yeah, I said. It is. On day 12, my mother called. I let it ring twice. Not out of any game playing, I was genuinely trying to decide if I was ready. Then I picked up. Cassidy. Her voice was different. Softer. A little uncertain in a way I didn't hear often from her. Hi, Mom. A pause. Your father and I have been talking. Okay. Your letter, another pause. It was a lot to take in. I know. Some of what you wrote, She stopped. And this is where something in me just went very still, because my mother is not someone who stops mid-sentence often. She always knows what she wants to say. I didn't realize. Some of those things the furnace, I knew about the furnace, but I didn't think of it as she stopped again. Mom, I said, gently. You don't have to explain everything right now. I want to. And the thing is, she did sound like she wanted to. Cassidy, I think your father and I have had a certain story in our heads about you. That you were the one who was fine. And I think we let that story be an excuse. I felt something in my chest. Not relief exactly. More like the slow creak of a door that has been closed for a very long time. I appreciate you saying that, I said. We want to revisit the conversation about the house, she said. Your father and I. We want to talk about it properly. Not just announce it. Okay, I said. I think that's worth doing. We arranged to talk in December, a video call, all 5 of us, the 3 siblings and both parents. My mother had told Marcus and Delia about my letter, which I had expected. Their reactions, as I'll describe, were not identical. Delia called me before the family call. She was the one I hadn't fully anticipated. Cass, she said, and her voice had that particular texture of someone who has been crying recently, or thinking hard, or both. I need to tell you something. Okay. I knew you were going to be left out. Mom told me before she told you. She asked me if I thought it was fair, and I said. She stopped. I didn't say what I should have said. I said you'd be fine. And I just kept saying that. And I've been thinking about your letter and I'm ashamed of that. I sat with that for a moment. Delia, for all her chaos, has always had a genuinely tender heart underneath it. This was its showing. Delia, I said. I'm not angry at you. You should be a little. Maybe, I said. But I understand. You needed something and you didn't want anything complicating that. That's human. It's not right. No, I agreed. It isn't. But I'm not interested in punishing you for it. She cried a little. I let her. And there was something clarifying about that conversation, not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first time in a long time I felt like I was talking to my sister and not to the story my family had built around her. Marcus's response was different. He texted me, not called, texted a message that was about 3 sentences long, essentially saying that he thought I was making a big deal out of something and that family shouldn't be about money. Which is a very comfortable thing to say when you're one of the people who has been allocated the money. I didn't respond to that text. Not because I was punishing him either, just because I genuinely didn't have the energy for that particular conversation. The family call happened on a Sunday afternoon in December. It was one of the stranger experiences of my life. My parents on one side of the screen, looking slightly formal. Marcus and Jolene on their screen. Jolene wasn't supposed to be there but showed up anyway, which was fine. Delia at her kitchen table alone. And me. My father spoke first, which surprised me. He's usually the one who hangs back and lets my mother run these things. Cassidy, he said. I want to say something, and I want to say it to everyone. He cleared his throat. I think your mother and I made a decision too quickly and without enough thought about what it communicated. Not just about the house, but about how we see you. My father is not an emotional man. That sentence cost him something. I could see it. I've always thought of you as the strong one, he continued. And I think I used that as a reason not to look harder. That was wrong. You've shown up for this family a lot of times that I didn't give enough credit to. The letter made that clear. I didn't cry. I wanted to. There was a pressure behind my eyes that was real. But I didn't, because I needed to stay present for the conversation. Thank you, Dad, I said. That means a lot. What came next was about 2 hours of conversation that I won't reproduce in full because a lot of it was genuinely private and meant for my family. But the broad strokes. My parents agreed to revisit the estate plan. Not to give me an equal share necessarily, that conversation was still in progress, but to have the conversation properly, with all 3 of us, rather than presenting a decision and expecting acceptance. Marcus was uncomfortable throughout. He's a man who hates things being reopened once he thinks they're closed. At one point he said something about how we all know Cass will be fine regardless, and I watched my father actually cut him off, gently, but clearly, and say, that's not the point, Marcus. I don't think Marcus had been cut off by my father in a non-joking context in his entire adult life. His face did something interesting. Delia was quieter than usual, but was there, which was its own kind of statement. By the end of it, nothing was resolved, technically. No new legal documents. No formal promises. Just a conversation that had finally actually been a conversation. It was enough for the moment. More than I'd had in years. I want to be honest about the aftermath, because it wasn't neat. There was a period of about 2 months where my mother called more than usual, sometimes twice a week. These were good calls mostly. She was working something through. I could hear it in the way she talked about the past, about decisions she'd made, about the family she thought she'd built versus the one that apparently existed. I showed up for those calls. I think she needed them. My father and I had a separate conversation in January, just the 2 of us, which almost never happened. He asked me questions about my life in Vancouver that he'd never asked before. What was my job actually like? Did I have people there? What did I do on weekends? He was awkward about it. He's not a natural at this kind of conversation, but he was trying, which I hadn't seen from him in a long time. Maybe ever. Marcus was harder. He and I texted occasionally, but didn't talk for several months. Eventually, we had a brief, slightly stiff phone call where he said he was glad things were working out, and I said the same thing, and neither of us pushed it further. We're not resolved. I think we won't be for a while, maybe longer. Marcus doesn't like having his assumptions challenged, and my letter challenged one he'd been carrying for 34 years. The estate situation was eventually revisited with a formal family meeting, this one in person, in February, which meant I flew back to Ontario. My parents had met with an estate lawyer. The new arrangement, which I'm not going to lay out in detail because honestly it's private, gave me a meaningful stake that acknowledged my contributions and my relationship to the property, while still providing for Marcus and Delia in ways that reflected their circumstances. It wasn't about the money. I want to say that again because it's true. It was never really about the money. It was about the message the money was carrying. And the new arrangement sent a different message. I stood in the backyard of that house on a cold February afternoon while the adults were talking inside, and I looked at the maple tree, the big scar on the branch. I thought about my grandmother, who had planted that tree when she was young and who had no idea what it would see. I thought about all the summers of my childhood. I thought, I still love this place. I'm glad I said something. I've told this story a few times now. To Margot, to a couple of close friends, to a therapist I started seeing in January, because this whole process cracked some things open that needed working on. And each time I tell it, I notice something different. What I'm left with is not triumph. Honestly, if I had to name the feeling, it's closer to something like earned peace. The kind you only get by going through something uncomfortable all the way to the other side. Here's what I know now. Being capable is not the same as being okay with being invisible. I spent a long time confusing those two things. I thought that because I could handle things, it meant I was handling everything fine. It didn't. I was handling the outside stuff fine. The inside stuff was quietly accumulating. Staying quiet is a choice with consequences. I chose, for years, not to say what I was feeling. That was partly temperament. I'm not a loud person by nature. And partly a kind of pride, and partly, I think, fear. Fear that if I said I need to be acknowledged here, I'd be told I was wrong to need it. Staying quiet felt safer. What it actually did was allow a story to be built around me that wasn't true, and then to have decisions made based on that story. You can be honest without being aggressive. My letter was not an ultimatum. It didn't make demands. It was just true. And it did more than any argument I could have had at that Thanksgiving table, because it gave my parents something to think about privately, without the defensiveness that comes from a confrontation. I think that's actually important. The goal was never to win. It was to be understood. Forgiveness and resolution are not the same thing. I've forgiven my parents, genuinely, not performatively. I understand how they got to the conclusions they got to. That doesn't mean everything is resolved. Some things will take years. Some things, maybe Marcus, may never fully resolve. That's okay. Forgiveness doesn't require a neat ending. And here's the last thing, the one that sits deepest. The people who love you should be willing to look at you when you show them something true about yourself. My parents, when pushed, did that. It was late, and it was hard, and it took more work than it should have. But they looked. And that matters. Some people won't look. That's the harder truth underneath this one. Some families, some parents, some siblings, when shown the truth, they look away. They get defensive. They find a way to make you the problem for having said anything at all. If that's what had happened here, I would have had to make very different decisions about my relationship with my family. I was prepared for that. But it didn't happen. Not entirely. And I'm grateful. It's summer now. June. Vancouver is the most beautiful it gets. That brief window when the mountains are visible and the air is warm and the city forgets it spent 8 months under clouds. Last weekend, my parents came to visit. First time they'd come to Vancouver since I moved here 6 years ago. I took them to Stanley Park. I showed them my neighborhood, my hospital from the outside, the coffee shop where I spend too much money on lattes. My mother cried a little when she saw my apartment. Not for any dramatic reason, just, I think, because she was realizing how much of my life she'd only had a partial picture of. My father stood on my little balcony looking at the mountains and didn't say much for a while. Then he said, "You've built something good here, Cass." "I know," I said. Not bragging. Just knowing it. He nodded. "I should have come sooner." "You're here now," I said. And that was enough. Really, truly enough. I don't have a big conclusion about what family should be, or some prescriptive message about standing up for yourself, or a neat little bow on everything. Life doesn't really work like that. What I have is this: I said a true thing at the right time in the right way. And it changed things. Not instantly, not completely, not without some things staying broken. But it changed things. My name is Cassidy Marlowe. I'm 34 years old. I'm an ICU nurse in Vancouver, and I have a maple tree in a family property in Prince Edward County that I still consider, at least a little, mine. And I never needed to raise my voice once. Thank you for being here for this. If any part of this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the capable one who was quietly left behind, you already know how this feels. And you already know, somewhere, that you deserve to be seen too.